Hello, friends. Welcome back to Colliding Worldviews. Great to have you here with me today. And in our last episode, which we're going to be mentioning a little bit in this episode as well, is a book called No-Go Zones by Raheem Qasim, How Sharia Law is Coming to a Neighborhood Near You. In my first episode that I did with my guest, who's joining me once again, we talked about Dearborn, Michigan. Many times that is considered a no-go zone. But as we talked about in that episode, it is not a no-go zone in any way like you will find in Europe. And that was even going with the working definition of what a no-go zone is. But here back with me in this episode, where we're talking about sharing the gospel in Dearborn, Michigan. Yes, it does happen all the time. I have with me once again Scott Cherry. He's a Christian minister and also the general editor of towandtowheed.com. That's his website that you definitely need to check out. And also pick up a copy of his book, The Reason of Reason, How Reason, Logic, and Intelligibility Together Are Evidence for God. Scott, welcome back to Colliding Worldviews once again.
Great to be back with you, Tony.
Scott, Dearborn, Michigan is not a no-go zone, quote unquote, when we compare it to places in Europe that people say, hey, this is a no-go zone for sure. If that's a working definition, then no, Dearborn is not, because people are very surprised to find out that in Dearborn, Michigan, people do door-to-door evangelism. They will go and give Bibles to Muslims. They will give out Jesus film DVDs to Muslims. They'll go to the park and open air preach. They'll go to college campuses and open air preach. Yeah, even in Dearborn itself, as well as other surrounding cities and towns. Scott, you have lived in Dearborn for 22 years. You are a Christian. They haven't told you you're not allowed to live here, and they haven't kicked you out. You're still there. You're still doing your thing. You still love to share the gospel with Muslims, as I do myself, and many other Christians do as well. What kind of ministry is happening in Dearborn?
If I think about all the different people that are being faithful Christians and being bold and loving Christians who want to share their faith openly and obey the Great Commission of Jesus, there are so many multiple kinds of evangelism happening. There are ESL centers. There are people going door to door and having evangelistic conversations with whoever answers the door, often Muslims, as you mentioned already. There are people like myself who do open-air preaching. Maybe it's in a public park. Maybe it's here at the university where I am right now. That's a blackboard right behind me. I'm at U of M Dearborn. And in the fall, when we have nice summer-like weather in September and October, we do open-air preaching right here on the campus. And we can do it anywhere in Dearborn. We could go to Hamtramck too and do open-air preaching, and nothing bad ever happens. There are people who, Christian people who have deep, abiding relationships with Muslims. That's what they do. They love them. They care about them. They want to spend time with them. They might help them with citizenship or with other problems they have, fixing their car or something on their house or even finding a house. I remember meeting a man from Jordan at Christmas time, and he had just moved here, and he was looking for a house. And so I helped him. I connected him to a real estate agent who is a Christian too in my church, and they helped him to find a house. So there are, practical needs that Muslims have, and Christians love to help people with their practical needs. We write literature, we use the internet, that is Facebook and Instagram, and some of us have websites. The website you mentioned, towandtowheed.com, is a website where people can read about philosophy or theology, the Bible, current issues, and the intersection of all those subjects. They can stretch their minds. They can get intellectual because there's a lot of intellectual stuff. And that's a way that we can engage people with the Christian message. Some of that may be directly what we call the gospel, how to be accepted by God, how to have the assurance of salvation, or perhaps how to have confidence in the parts of the Bible. The post I just made today is about the Gospel of Mark. It was written by a student here at U of M Dearborn, and he's writing about why did Jesus so often tell people not to tell everyone else about the miracle that he just did, or about his true identity as the Messiah. So I like to actually try to build teams and organize people and sort of mobilize Christian people into doing types of evangelism that fit their temperament and their skills.
And Scott, if I want to encourage people too, if anyone has a heart for Muslims and wants to get the gospel out to them, going to Dearborn, Michigan, either to permanently live there or to perhaps take a mission trip. If you want a much cheaper mission trip than going out of the United States to another country, it's going to feel pretty international if you take a trip to Dearborn and you take your church and you go out and you see Dearborn, you eat the food, but at the same time, you talk with the Muslims. Now, of course, not every Arab-looking person is a Muslim. You have many Arab-looking people who are there who are Christians and love Jesus Christ, and they have a heart for Muslims as well. But yes, there are a ton of Muslims there. Scott, Dearborn itself is what, like 30% Muslim or so? What's the latest percentage there?
It could be as high as about 45%. I belong to a Facebook group that has a lot of Muslim people in it from Dearborn, and I heard them talking about a community that's about 45% Arab Muslim. That sounds right to me because I've heard similar statistics.
Okay, and it's probably about that same percentage in Hamtramck. Hamtramck you mentioned just briefly earlier, but we did talk about it in the first episode, being close to Dearborn. But there they actually have the first Muslim majority city council, and there they do have the call to prayer that a lot of people hear. You say it's even more Islamized or what have you, more than Dearborn is. But in both of these cities, again, it's not a no-go zone when you think about the actual no-go zones that kind of give no-go zone its definition that we find in Europe. That is not the case. Now, the Arab festival, which was very popular, that has actually completely ceased. That annual Arab festival, which many people took the opportunity to go and share the gospel with Muslims, that event's not even happening any longer, right, Scott?
That's right. That event was discontinued. And, many of the Christians who are locals and we live in Dearborn, we were so sad about that. The Arab Festival was so wonderful. It was so just energetic and so much fun for everyone.
Now, of course, people do hear different stories about the Arab Festival. Obviously, Christians did go there to give out Jesus films, to give out gospels and stuff. At the same time, you hear stories from Christians who say that when they went out there to talk with Muslims to give out something, that they were told by police or other security, oh no, you need to go down there. So there was obviously some opposition to getting the gospel out to Muslims. We hear, of course, I forget the guy's name who put the pig head on the stick, and then you see the video of not all of them, but a whole bunch of Muslims throwing stuff at him, water bottles and everything else. Usually, putting a pig head on a stick isn't the most tactful thing to do if you're trying to share the truth with Muslims. Not very good outreach tactic. But we also hear the other stories of Christians who, again, have gone there and have been very successful in sharing the gospel with Muslims. It seemed like there were issues there. I know that the city has been sued, it seems like a number of times over the years, and it is sad that that was shut down, especially because, again, it was being taken advantage of so many Christians to go and share the gospel with Muslims. Other than the festival and the on-campus open-air preaching that you do, the door-to-door evangelism that people do as well. What other things are Christians taking advantage of to share the gospel with Muslims?
Well, Christians invite Muslims to come to church. They invite Muslims to come to Bible studies at the church or at Starbucks or at the university, and to come to Christian events. And sometimes Christians will stage events like Bible studies or fun events in the park for Muslim people to engage in and to become involved in. A number of churches have done open-air festivals with games and also with performances, live choirs. And, Christians can be creative, and thankfully, they can think outside of the box sometimes, and they can try new things or retry things. How some people say you don't need to reinvent the wheel, or why put so much effort into reinventing the wheel? But sometimes you need to invent a new wheel, or reinvent one. There's lots of different kinds of wheels, and so there are lots of different methods and means, and sometimes you just have to go back and use some. Sometimes you have to leave them and say, okay, this is not getting the traction that we want. Muslims don't care. They say it's irrelevant. You leave it alone and then maybe come back to it after some years. But we want to engage Muslim people because we love them, we care about them, we know that they believe some of the same things that we believe, but we know that they need the hope and the joy and the assurance of salvation that comes with embracing Christ as Lord and Savior. And often Muslims do not object to this idea, and they're attracted to Christians who are joyful and hopeful and express care and a real zeal for life. But so Christians, no matter what means and methods they use, they have to get out there. They have to mingle with Muslim people. They have to be where Muslim people are and go where they go, and learn to appreciate them as human beings and people who want many of the same things that everybody wants. A safe life, job opportunities, and future opportunities. Everything that I want, they want too.
It's important to let people know as well, Scott, that no, not every single Muslim in Dearborn or the surrounding area is hoping to talk with a Christian or may not have the best reaction when you try to talk with them and or share the gospel with them. That's fine. I mean, that's the case if you're out, in any city in America. Not everyone's going to feel like having a spiritual conversation. Not everyone is going to respond favorably to the gospel, to the good news. And that's the same case in Dearborn as well. When you're talking with Muslims, yes, there are going to be Muslims who may get angry or say, "Get away from me," or worst case, something more. But at the same time, Muslims in Dearborn have the freedom to actually receive a Bible, to hear the gospel in a place where they can't. If you're talking about us as Christians going to the country that they may have come from, in America they have the freedom to own a Bible, they have the freedom to hear the gospel, they have the freedom to have a Christian friend. Now, of course, when you bring in the different levels of conservatism within Islam, there are going to be Muslims who, if they get a Bible from you, a Gospel of John or even a Gospel tract, they're not going to let their family know. They're going to hide it or keep it someplace else. But regardless of those different factors that will bring in fear to a Muslim, if they let other Muslims that they know aware, I'm actually doubting Islam, I'm actually thinking about Christianity, it's actually appealing to me, I love this Jesus who Christians talk about, it sounds so much different than the Isa that I learn about in the Quran, which of course is a Islamized false version of who Jesus actually was. We need to take that stuff into account as well. Scott, one of the interesting things, yes, Dearborn is the highest concentration of Muslims in America, but it's actually usually it's mainly the minority group of Muslims in the world. If people are unaware, about 88, 90% of Muslims in the world, the 1.6 billion are Sunni, and then a large chunk of the remaining amount are Shia. So there are other smaller groups as well, but Shia is the largest minority at maybe 15% max. I mean, definitely less than, probably, more like 10 to 12. But Dearborn is mainly Shia. It's mainly the minority Muslims in the world. And that is an interesting dynamic because I've actually asked people in Dearborn, I've asked people from the Middle East as well as people who were born or have lived in Dearborn. They've never been to the Middle East. But Scott, when I asked both parties, if every Shia in Dearborn were actually a Sunni, how do you think the atmosphere would be different? And I've had, again, people from there and also from the Middle East who are there now say it would be like Europe. Like they're actually, saying that the Sunnis are much more aggressive, maybe, in Islamization or whatever else. I also know that the Shias are very interfaithy, quote unquote. It seems like they're more open to these interfaith events and stuff than Sunnis are. What's your comment on that?
I have a friend, an Arab friend from Iraq, whose theory it is that, yes, Sunnis are more aggressive. And if this were a Sunni community, it would be much closer to a no-go zone. Then I said the same thing. I told what he said to another Arab person, and he totally disagreed. He said, no, Shiites are more aggressive. You get different opinions. I think that the Shia Muslims in Dearborn have become, like you said, more interfaithy. They talk a whole lot more like Christians do. But I wonder if that's something that they've learned here. There's something about their brand of Islam that has caused them to imbibe and absorb some of the expressions of Christianity. So in some ways, maybe it has become somewhat Christianized maybe on a surface level. That's an interesting thing to think about. But I started pondering another possibility, Tony. I think that one of the reasons why Dearborn is not a no-go zone, one reason, is because of Christians. Because there are still vibrant churches in Dearborn, and there are Christians who have moved into Dearborn for the purpose of being salt and light, the way Jesus talked about. So if all you did was move in and you mingled with your neighbors and you were prayerful, there's a preservational effect that Christians have on any neighborhood, on any society, I think. And plus the Christians that I know and my friends and acquaintances, we get together for prayer, every Tuesday and other random times. We pray for the city of Dearborn. And I'm thinking of churches that exist that have been planted, like Springwell's Church, right on Michigan Avenue. It exists to be a lighthouse, to be a place of hope and joy and new life to the Muslim people in the neighborhoods around it. And those people know how to pray. They pray, and they are doing battle in the heavenly zones, the way that you hear sometimes. I mean, there's fervent prayer happening in and around Dearborn and for Dearborn. I cannot help believe that that is a big reason why Dearborn is a great place to live. It is.
And that doesn't change the fact, of course, that there are Christians there who are concerned with increased Islamization, or their opinion that Muslims are catered to in different ways, that they're getting this privileged status just because of the percentage of Muslims who are there, or what have you. Yes, there are Christians who are concerned. There are also many Christians who say, hey, I'm going to use my concern to motivate me to go out there and share the gospel with Muslims more. At the same time, in case anyone had the impression in this episode or the last episode, Scott, you and I, neither you nor I advocate Chrislam. Obviously, there's a couple of different working definitions of that. We do not advocate that Christianity and Islam are really the same religion. They just have superficial differences. And also, we don't advocate the Chrislam, what's referring to the insider movement. We don't try to spread this Islamized version of Christianity in order to appeal to Muslims. That's usually the most popular reference that someone's talking about when they say Chrislam. That's not the case. Scott, as well as other Christians, myself, when we're there, we share the clear, true biblical gospel. We actually define our terms, because unfortunately, Scott, as you know, if Christians and Muslims both say they believe in God, they both believe in Jesus, well, there are going to be Christians out there who say, hey, we pretty much believe the same thing. We're just superficially different. Well, no, because as soon as you ask who is God, who is Jesus, you have fundamentally different answers. And unfortunately, if anyone thinks, well, as long as they believe in God and Jesus, then they're okay, that's not the case. They have a wrong Jesus. He's just a prophet. He didn't die on the cross. He didn't rise from the dead. So the three fundamental aspects of the gospel are denied by Islam. And unfortunately, there have been pastors who say, hey, we don't need to share the gospel with Muslims. We just need to love them. And you ask them, well, what are you doing to love Muslims? Well, they don't have an answer for that either. So it's so great that there are Christians in Dearborn, you being one of them, who have a heart for Muslims and boldly go out there and share the truth with them, who Jesus Christ truly is, and in defining terms all the time to make sure that there isn't confusion, right?
Exactly. You said it so eloquently, Tony.
Thank you. And we only have a few minutes left, but yeah, that is something, and it's been great, whenever I have been there out ministering with you, Scott, or, we went to a conference in the area where Christians from all over the U.S. I mean, there's actually some international people as well who came to this conference, and everyone had a heart for Muslims. Say, yes, we don't like Islam. It's the greatest lie in the world, and 1.6 billion people are victims of that lie. But Radical Truth, the ministry that I'm with, the late Joe Carey, a great friend of mine, always used the acronym of Islam, ISLAM, as I shall love all Muslims. And he would let people know that when he was out educating Christians about Islam, and not sugarcoating it, but at the same time saying, hey, people need the gospel, and all people includes all Muslims. And Scott, you and your website, tauandtauheed.com, is a place where people can find more resources. They can find different stories that you share of people who you've come in contact with. And you live there. You live amongst Muslims. Again, if I've walked out in front of your house, I see 9 out of 10 cars have a woman wearing a hijab. I mean, if you're looking to talk with Muslims, to minister to Muslims, you can't find a more economically reasonable place to take a mission trip than Dearborn, Michigan. And you can also connect with Scott. He can show you around. Yeah. Scott, are people able to connect with you if they want to travel there, and say maybe their church says, hey, we want to come check it out. We want to take a little tour. We want to find out about good places to go and talk with Muslims?
Yes, absolutely. I would love to welcome you and host you in my fair city, in my neighborhood. Depends on how long you want to come and what you want to do when you're here. Maybe all you want to do is visit. But you can easily find me on Facebook. You can communicate with me through our website that Tony just mentioned. You can also visit our YouTube channel, which has the same name, Tao and Tawhid Collective on YouTube. And of course, you can message us through there, or even my email address. If you look me up in the University of Michigan directory, you'll find my email address. I'll just tell you, srcherry@umich.edu.
Great. And folks, we do want to encourage you to connect with Scott. If nothing else, again, pick up his book called The Reason of Reason, How Reason, Logic, and Intelligibility Together Are Evidence for God. Scott, I'm looking at it right now. People can get that book on Amazon for $4.64. And that is for the paperback. That's not even the Kindle version.
I'm about to raise the price. You better watch out. You better get it now.
Yeah, get it before Scott's raised the price, because it's available. You can buy it in bulk and give it out to other people as well, because in addition to having a heart for Muslims, Scott is a Christian apologist. He likes to give defense for the faith. He gives people, whether they're Muslims or not, evidence for why Christianity is true, why the Bible is reliable, and that it has not been changed, as some Muslims claim or have heard. Do we actually have evidence that Jesus is the eternal Son of God in human flesh, that he did die on a cross, that he did rise from the dead? Of course, that's where apologetics comes in, and those are things that Scott loves to talk about.
That's right.
Scott, it's been great to have you here on Colliding Worldviews for these two different episodes, one on no-go zones, this one on getting the gospel to people in Dearborn, Michigan. Thank you so much for being here. God bless you and the work that you're doing, and may he continue to use you for his glory and to reach Muslims with the gospel.
Thank you very much, Tony. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, friends. Pick up Scott's book. Again, in the last episode, we talked about no-go zones, how Sharia law is coming to a neighborhood near you by Raheem Qasim. And again, to make it clear, if you compare what no-go zones are like in Europe, no, Dearborn, Michigan is not one. So if you hear that, let people know about this guy named Scott, who's lived there for 22 years, who is a Christian, who does all types of outreach there because he loves Muslims, who he's surrounded by. At the same time, yes, there's a high concentration of Muslims there. Again, there are concerned Christians there. There are stories that you will hear about people getting kicked out of places or arrested, and of course, just the Arab festival being shut down for a few different reasons. But it's still a great place to go, to visit, to check out. Again, if you have a heart for Muslims, if you want to see Muslims come to Christ, you have the freedom in Dearborn, Michigan, to share the gospel with them, to give them a gospel tract, to give them a Gospel of John, to give them a Bible in English and or another language that they speak. But you can reach out to them. And that is something that we need to keep in mind when we think about immigrants and refugees, even the fake refugees who are coming to the West. God's sovereign. Every single thing that happens, whether we like it or not, happens for one of two reasons. Either God allowed it or he caused it. So how should we as a church respond? And we should get the gospel out to people. And if you have a heart for Muslims, you can go to Dearborn, Michigan. You can go to the surrounding areas, and you have the freedom to share the gospel with Muslims. It's our job to plant the seed. We can't convert anyone. We can't save anyone. But it's our job to get the gospel to a lost and dying world, and God will bring the increase. God bless you, and we'll see you next time on Colliding Worldviews.